I'm Ivana Graham, and this is part 3 of my interview with Alta Graham and Tony Fishel. In part 2, they discussed what they do in their own classrooms to support dyslexic learners, and they also talked about what motivated them to do the hard work of writing a book. Now, on to part 3.
See, Tony, in the book, you mentioned that you went to your mother's classes, she was a teacher, and explained to your mother's students what dyslexia was.
Yes.
What gave you the idea to do that, and what was the response?
I am sure some of it had to do with this way of looking at the world between seeing everything in a classroom and you're either the student or the teacher. I felt more comfortable being the teacher, even kind of back then when I wasn't in school and when reading wasn't involved, which was like 99% of the time for most kids in the 80s. I seemed to integrate and work together with other kids totally well. I felt like my ideas were creative and often accepted, and maybe I thought I understood a lot about dyslexia, and maybe thought that by explaining it to other kids, it might prevent somebody from getting picked on or bullied, or prevent somebody from the experience that I had in terms of really not being accepted because I couldn't read.
You had a special ed teacher that you mentioned was very important to you. Can you just give us a little more information on her?
Mrs. Levesque was my teacher at Barrington Middle School when we had just moved to Barrington when I was in the 7th and the 8th grade. And unlike all of the other kind of resource room teachers that I had had before, she didn't try to teach me how to read or to spell at all. I think that she had seen the records and understood that that was probably not some mountain that she was going to be able to climb, and then decided that, like, instead of trying to teach me how to do something that I probably wasn't going to be able to do, like, provide for me a way to communicate to the teachers that I did at least understand the content of their classes, and that, like, I could answer the questions on a test accurately as long as I understood what the questions were. So what I would do is just bring tests to her. She would read them to me, and I would say the answers, and she would write the answers down. That was really all I needed. It really allowed me to flourish in classes where I was not doing that before.
Alta, you learned to speed read eventually. I mean, not immediately at age 7, but you still can't sound out words. You still don't read orally with ease. Can you talk about how those things are different?
The speed reading was, well, when it did happen, it seemed fairly inevitable. I may not have been doing 1,000 words a minute at age 7, but it was the same process, I think. From what you've told me, even at 7, I wasn't tracking back and forth across this page.
One thing I noticed, since I am a reading teacher, one thing I noticed is that when you did learn to read, your eyes went right down the middle of the page and did not go back and forth along the lines like what I was used to. So can you share what's happening in your brain and your eyes when you read?
When I read, I don't register the image of the words at all, really. Um, Especially something that I can read through fast, a novel, something like that. It's pick it up and know what it says, not any conscious reading process at all.
And do you think most dyslexic people would be capable of that?
Well, that's hard to be sure of without extensive studies. But given the percentage of people that can learn to speed read, regardless of whether they are dyslexic, uh, I would say a lot of people could learn to read that way, a lot of dyslexic people.
Speed reading coaches say, send me the kids who are dyslexic and ADHD. Those are the kids who are going to turn into real speed readers. Can you comment on whether you think that's a valid idea or not?
Sounds very valid to me. The dyslexia means you're less likely to get hung up on the phonics, which will slow you down, and ADD hyperfocuses.
Let me just bounce back to Tony for just a moment, because he's mentioned that, Tony, that you just have some trouble getting slowed down when you're reading. Do you ever experience a kind of speed reading thing where you just glance at a piece of text and you know what it means?
No.
Doesn't happen. Okay.
No.
And I think that's so important, because what we don't want to do is say, okay, all dyslexics are going to learn to read in one way. And
no, they're all different.
And so in your case, that text still slows you down, and you're better off with an audiobook. Am I right?
Yes.
I think that's important for teachers to know, because there's no reason in our world that students should not have access to audiobooks. And one thing I wanted to bring up with you, Tony, is I've heard a lot of teachers say, I don't want kids using audiobooks because it just makes them lazy, then they don't want to read. Can you respond to that comment, please?
Probably the same could have been said with knowing how to use a telegraph machine. Everyone should know that, right? Because that's how you communicate on these wires. Eventually, that system of communication got replaced with one that did not require the need to know that. No matter how efficient and awesome it was, it probably will be replaced with something else. And at some point, I don't think that we'll look at taking information out of symbols in the same way that we did before. Always used to be in these written symbols that were started off on clay and then paper for a long time. And the same symbols now are like what we have on the screens, but like we don't need to use those symbols anymore. There's a much more direct route to the understanding and to the meaning than those symbols. Do we care about understanding what the symbols mean? Of course. But is it even more important to understand what the symbols are trying to communicate?
That is, how do we communicate meaning from teacher to student or from parent to child in a way that makes sense for the learner? And technology, as you have just pointed out, has changed that equation dramatically.
I put that wood burning stove in. I didn't read anything. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos.
I want to thank Alta and Tony for being here and for communicating what it feels like to be dyslexic and smart and not able to read when other people are, and then how that can change and how there's hope at any age.
You know, all people, not just students, not just dogs, all people respond to positive reinforcement, and that any kind of punishment or negative reinforcement to any living thing that's around you will always be counterproductive, and that you have to be compassionate and kind of put yourself in their shoes and ask yourself, you know, if I were them, what could I provide myself that would be the best for me, that would give me what I need to help be prosperous?
Maybe reiterate, remember that just because a student doesn't get things from a printed page doesn't mean they don't get things.